We are back from our coffee break. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. I want to welcome back our President and CEO, Jim Matthews, as he introduces our keynote speaker for the day. Jim?
Thanks, Joe. I could not be more excited about this. Tony Coscia, the chairman of Amtrak, is with us to kind of bring us home. We've tried a couple of times in some of our past spring meetings to make this work, and we've not been able to make the timing work out. And so this time we were finally able to do it. Nominated by President Obama as a director of the Amtrak board in November 2009, he was confirmed by the Senate in that position in June 2010. Tony Kocher was elected chairman of the board of Amtrak in 2013. And he's been the chairman of the audit and the finance committee since July of 2011. He was also chairman of the board of commissioners of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And he's also been chairman of the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. In his real life, in his day job, he's a partner at Windows, Marks, Lane, and Mittendorf, and works very closely in the area of sort of redevelopment finance and corporate governance. I will tell you that I have had, I can't tell you how many very positive conversations I've had with Tony over the years about Amtrak, about the service, about what it does for our country, about what it does for the taxpayers who support it. And we were talking together in his office in New York about how the long distance network can be the backbone of a renaissance in service as early as 2018. And we talked then about a vision in which we would begin to build corridor services hanging off of these long distance networks and routes, almost like jewelry off a necklace, that these would be connected together. It was an exciting vision then, and it looks like we're really starting to see this now. And I could not be happier to have Tony with us today to sort of share that vision and any other thoughts he may have in advance of your meetings with your congressional delegations tomorrow and for the rest of the week. Tony, thank you so much for being here. We are just thrilled to have you, and I'm really appreciative of you clearing the time for us.
Sure. Jim, thanks. And let me just sort of start just making sure everyone can hear me.
We can.
Jim, am I coming through? Okay, great.
You are coming through.
Great. Good morning, I guess. Still morning. Good morning, everyone. And let me begin by basically saying that it has really been the honor of my professional career to serve as Amtrak board chair for since 2013, and on the Amtrak board for almost a decade. And I am incredibly proud, actually, of the people at Amtrak who have time and time again shown me what they're really capable of and how they sort of step up to the challenge. It's just incredibly inspiring to me to see what happened during COVID in terms of how people responded to it. You know, you learn a lot about a group of people when they have to deal with a crisis, and certainly Amtrak has had no shortage of challenges during its history, but COVID presented some fairly significant challenges that I think would have been difficult for many to handle. And the group that stood up and began by ensuring the safety of all of our employees and passengers, and then basically dusted ourselves off and dealt with the aftermath of that much of a sort of abrupt shortfall in our business. As I said, I never miss an opportunity to basically say that it's sort of humbling for me to be in a leadership position with such an incredible group of people. Let me before I sort of share some of my thoughts and let me just sort of say a couple of things from a preliminary nature. First of all, I know that you've heard from our CEO, Bill Flynn, and our president, Stephen Gardner, and Larry Chesler today already. So you've heard a lot about Amtrak and where we are and our plans for the future. And hopefully I have something to add relative to the vision. But most importantly, I think the thing that I can add is to give all of you some level of assurance as to how the board feels about these issues, because I know that there have been times that, that maybe message we haven't been very good at clearly providing. So hopefully I can help in that respect. The second preliminary comment I wanted to make is that unlike many of the conversations that I often have trying to get people to understand the value of intercity passenger rail to the country, and more importantly, to people who depend on it, this is a group that doesn't require that tutorial. In fact, frankly, I've learned a tremendous amount from speaking to Jim and your colleagues over the years, and many of the decisions that I've supported have been informed by those conversations. So I begin today saying that I will share with you my vision that I think reflects the vision of our board and I think the vision of our company. But I also am very grateful and cognizant of the critical role that RPA and its members have played in formulating that vision and hopefully continuing that into the future. As you know, and I'm sure there's been much discussion about this already, it's Amtrak's 50th anniversary this year, and it struck me that some of you have been advocating in support of Amtrak since the passage of Amtrak's founding legislation. That support has been so important over the years and has helped keep Amtrak going. Even during times when it seemed like everyone was against us, you've always been there for us, and I thank you again for that. We've also heard from you and from our stakeholders across the country, and we know that you want us to be bold in the role that passenger rail and Amtrak can play, and we have a vision for how to do this by being true to our mission of moving people and creating value around the nation. As our governing statute has recognized since the 1970s, Amtrak was never created to make money for the government. We exist to serve customers and our communities with efficient and meaningful service. We all know that no mode of transportation fully pays for itself. Airline tickets, the cost of driving, and commuter train and bus fares would all be prohibitively expensive if users had to fund all the costs associated with them. Even our roads and interstates, which road advocates used to love to say are, quote, user funded, require billions in subsidies each year, with the federal government providing more than $157 billion in general revenue subsidies to the insolvent highway trust funds since 2008. And of course, airlines don't build airports, and governments at various levels provide substantial subsidies to transit systems. The cost of intercity passenger rail just happens to run mostly through Amtrak. And as a result, the full expense of our mode is easier to see. Given this, Amtrak funding has always been the target for critics and competitors who like to forget that the subsidization that occurs across all modes. But in focusing on the costs, our critics fail to see the enormous value created by our network and the extraordinary achievements of Amtrak and our partners in improving performance of our service. President Biden recently released the American Jobs Plan, which includes interlinked plans for infrastructure investment, economic recovery, climate change, and social equity, including $80 billion designated specifically for rail. As you know, shortly after the plan went public, Amtrak announced its vision, Amtrak Connects Us, to grow rail service and connect new city pairs across America. This vision rises to the urgent challenges of our time and will provide new and improved train service to millions of additional passengers. Our country has changed a lot since 1971, and I know you've discussed this already today, but Amtrak still travels on largely the same routes, serving the same city pairs and connecting the same communities. Amtrak's corridor vision addresses both America's future and some of the most relevant and current issues: infrastructure investment, economic recovery, climate change, and social equity. We stand ready to work with the administration to bring new and improved Amtrak service to more of America as the specifics of its rail plan are released. While the estimated cost for infrastructure, stations, new train sets to implement the approximately 60 new and expanded corridors on the map, purchase new fleet for our long distance trains, and make investments to sustain and improve the Northeast Corridor, all of these things will cost tens of billions of dollars over the next few decades, but the incredible commitment, ambition, and funding levels proposed by this administration would truly launch a new era of passenger rail growth and development. We're anxious to get started on this vision by bringing what we know works around the world and here in the Northeast Corridor. That is frequent and reliable rail service to underserved communities across the country, while also taking steps toward a robust future of high-speed rail in certain corridors where that's possible. There are several major cities that do not have Amtrak service today, including Las Vegas, Nashville, Columbus, and Phoenix, an enormous missed opportunity. There are other cities where service is woefully inadequate, like Cincinnati, which is served by Amtrak only 3 times a week in the middle of the night. There are entire regions with very few Amtrak trains today, but where there are city pairs that could benefit from frequent rail service, including Atlanta, where we could very effectively serve communities like Chattanooga, Nashville, Savannah, Charlotte, and others, and in Texas, where we can connect Houston, San Antonio, and Dallas-Fort Worth. Even here in the Northeast, cities that should have much better rail options, like Concord, New Hampshire, Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Ronkonkoma on Long Island, all of these would benefit. All of these regions and communities deserve to have a real alternative to driving and flying, and Amtrak has the mandate and the capabilities in place to work with states, cities, and our host railroads and others to deliver such a future. Amtrak's also focused on addressing the social and economic inequities as part of development of our network. In addition to expanding service to regions of the country with significant African-American populations, the economic growth centered around Amtrak facilities is often located in and around underserved communities. Our work also benefits small businesses and disadvantaged business enterprises through our annual supplier diversity goals. Amtrak's vision for development to the South and Southwest means a significant proportion of the population served by our new corridors will be Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. With a growing and diverse population, a global climate crisis, and longer traffic jams, America needs a rail network that offers frequent, reliable, and sustainable and equitable train service. Our vision incorporates the input of stakeholders across the United States, state officials, mayors, businesses, and others who shared their local needs and expectations, and we will need to partner to work closely with these stakeholders to execute on this vision. I know that this topic was addressed by Bill and Stephen earlier today, but let me make this also incredibly clear. And I think Jim alluded to this based on conversations that he and I have had going back several years. Our vision builds on long distance trains, which remain and will always be an essential part of the Amtrak network. It is, in fact, the core of our system and something that we will always rely on and we will always protect. In addition to bringing service to more people and places, we have critical infrastructure needs in the Northeast, including dozens of bridges and stations and tunnels that are beyond their useful life and in need of immediate replacement and rehabilitation. We've made some important progress recently. The Gateway program, the most essential infrastructure development of the last 2 decades, is finally beginning construction on the Portal North Bridge. Vital projects like the Hudson Tunnel, the Portal North Bridge, rehabilitation of the East River tunnels, and improvements to New York Penn Station, as well as replacement of the BMP tunnel, have the potential to transform daily commutes for hundreds of thousands of people while creating new jobs and economic opportunities. I hope all of you have the opportunity to visit the Moynihan Train Hall in New York City, which opened earlier this year, and which is the type of train station that the late Senator Moynihan always envisioned for New York travelers. It's world-class with large, spacious areas for customers to explore, accessible features that cater to the needs of all Amtrak customers, state-of-the-art technologies to improve the boarding experience, a skylit atrium, a new reserved customer waiting room, and a new flagship premium metropolitan lounge. Moynihan Train Hall showcases the kind of improvement that Amtrak is undertaking across the railroad and prove that such vast improvements are in fact possible if we all work together and focus our energies. Let me say that we are at the cusp of a new era at Amtrak, introducing new service, adding trains to existing corridors, renewing our critical infrastructure, and providing a better transportation system for America. But here's the thing. If we want to make the future happen, we need to do some things differently. We have to deliver service that people across the country want to ride because it works for them. It's about the people on our trains. It needs to be convenient, frequent, trip time competitive, and of course, on time. The experience must be modern and delight our passengers, offering flexibility so that everyone feels comfortable and welcome. If someone doesn't want to share a booth with a stranger in a dining car for dinner or would prefer a healthier food option, we should be able to offer that flexibility to make sure they choose to ride Amtrak again. And none of our grand plans would come to fruition if our passengers keep being delayed by freight trains, or if the host railroads refuse to follow the law and allow us to quickly add new services on their lines. Preference enforcement and fair host railroad access are essential preconditions to Amtrak's success, and your voice has been incredibly valuable on these issues with policymakers across the country. Our mission is clear, our vision is bold, but the only way Amtrak will succeed is, again, with your continued support. Thank you for all that you do. You've been relentless in messaging to Congress that Amtrak is an essential service with thousands of interactions with congressional offices. And your work organizing communities across the United States to demand that Congress fund new routes, new frequencies, and new equipment will be the driving force to Amtrak's growth and success in the new era. It's been clear to me in my time as chair at Amtrak that RPA has been a very critical voice for keeping people focused on doing what's right for the national rail system. There have been many times when decisions I've made and that our board has made, I know have not been popular, or I know have caused people some concern. The voice of conscience that RPA represents, the voice of reason that RPA represents, has been an incredible part of all of this. And I hope it continues, and hope that I can be a good partner to you in that effort. Thank you.
Tony, thank you so much. And on behalf of our members, we're thrilled for the recognition. Thank you for that. And we want to keep working closely with all of you as well, because we do share the same vision. We do share the same goals. Even if we differ in the execution here and there, I think we all want the same things out of this. And certainly we've been excited to see Amtrak's embrace of actually growing, actually increasing services and being relevant in more places all over the country. That's a very exciting vision. We are at 12:02. I know that time is short. If you need to depart, that's fine. If you're willing to take a couple of questions, that's fine too. I'll leave it to you.
I'm happy to do that, Jim. Look forward to it.
Super. And then maybe next time I can actually buy you a lunch instead of us doing this across the screen. So listen, there's a lot of interest from our supporters in sort of the inputs and the deliberation that goes into the decisions that are made by the Amtrak board. How do you balance the need to protect the railroad's proprietary information? I mean, you're a government supported agency, but you're also a business, with the need to provide transparency for taxpayers and for the Congress and for the folks that are writing the checks. That's a tough balance. How are you wrestling with that?
Well, you know, it's and look, it's a great question, and appreciate you sort of framing it that way, because it is a challenge. The interesting thing about Amtrak and its history has always been that, you know, half the world thinks it's a business and the other half thinks it's a government agency. And the reality is that it probably isn't purely one or the other. And I know that most of your members are well versed enough to understand the nuance associated with that. Having said that, I have to tell you that my view, and I think this is a view largely shared by the board, is that we should err on the side of transparency. And now that doesn't mean it's always possible to do it. And sometimes it's hard to be transparent without also being misleading at the same time. So let me sort of quickly make a couple of points on that, because I think this is a key issue. We've worked really hard on trying to essentially create a very strong financial reporting and program reporting mechanism within Amtrak, because we weren't comfortable when we arrived and when we began this process that all the reporting was in fact accurate or did in fact present the right picture. But we worked really hard on creating what we now believe is an incredibly strong level of controls and safeguards around accuracy in our financial reporting and our operating reporting. Having done that, we actually think it's in our interest to err on the side of being much more transparent. Because as I mentioned in my comments, the more the world understands that all transportation, frankly, requires some level of subsidy, And the more we realize that these are in fact really important issues. I mean, the debate over long distance rail, this is a critical service that has to be provided, but the world needs to understand that someone needs to pay for it. People should not be permitted to stick their head in the sand and say, well, yeah, we might agree with you that it's critical, but you're just going to have to find some way to pay for it on your own. The reality is that we all have a responsibility for that. So I would say that the board has worked with management on trying to create a very high level of transparency, because our view, generally speaking, is that even though in a purely private company, there are matters that maybe, given their proprietary nature, you choose not to make them public. I think in Amtrak's case, an open book is probably something that ultimately serves us best. So we sort of err on that side.
Okay. I will say, for the benefit of everybody on the call, every conversation I've had with Tony, he has been very transparent with me. It's very true. We've been able to be very frank, and it's been very helpful in kind of understanding the bigger picture. Another issue that's sort of related, I mean, you sort of touched on that a minute ago. There's conflicting directives from Congress, right? I mean, there's be a business. No, be an agency. No, make a profit. No, losses, I don't have to make a profit. And there's this sort of, that's a tough one to deal with. I mean, how do you ensure the sort of the right balance there between sort of cutting costs, maximizing ridership, finding new and innovative sources of revenue, kind of building the new Amtrak out of that? Because you've got a lot of masters and they're telling you different things.
Yeah, I look, the sort of the reality is, and I know I keep harping on the same themes, but they're sort of fundamental to understanding the mobility business. So, if you accept the premise that the mobility business doesn't really pay for itself from a price standpoint, which it really doesn't. I mean, frankly, unless you're walking down the street, however you get from point A to point B, there's somebody who's sort of kicking in some money to make that possible. I mean, even walking down the street, theoretically, someone else is building the sidewalk that you're walking on. So, mobility is in and of itself not something that lends itself to a very typical economic model of you charge a price and you get paid and you make a profit. So I think it's naive when people sort of think you can approach it that way. So the reality is that in our business, we recognize that mobility, though, is really important. Mobility has a very big impact on economic empowerment, and it has a very big impact on quality of life, things that matter to pretty much everybody. So our job is to make sure that we're not giving anyone an excuse to not live up to their obligations or not to be committed to something as critical as mobility, because they can point to something we're doing. So when Amtrak wastes money on something, when we do something that is objectively sort of not the best use of resources, it typically is not an amount of money that makes that big of a difference in the scheme of everything we're talking about, but it gives someone an excuse to point to that, to say, see, this is why we should not be providing more money to passenger rail, because this money isn't being efficiently used. So I believe Amtrak's view relative to balancing the financial issues with the mission issues ought to be about serving the mission by just being good stewards of whatever financial resources we have. It is not about Amtrak making a profit. It's about making sure that Amtrak doesn't waste the resources that it has, because the one investor out there, which is the public sector, reacts very negatively to the perception that, there's some level of inefficiency. So, are we there yet? No, but we've made incredible strides from where we were at trying to support, an argument that Amtrak is a good place to put resources that can then be committed to a strong intercity passenger rail system that gives that mobility options to people. Jim, look, there are places in the United States where mobility is largely defined by the Amtrak service that is there. There are communities to whom Amtrak service is how somebody gets to where they're going, and the Amtrak service itself is an anchor to a sort of an economy locally that's really important to them. We will never abandon those places, ever. That is our mission. We're here for that purpose. So it's our job to make sure that we don't give people, silly critical excuses for why support for Amtrak, it may not be justified. And that's on us to make sure that we're doing that correctly.
Right. Don't give them the pretext.
Exactly.
So I'm going to ask you a question that I asked Stephen and Bill, because as I have approached this legislative season, I've had an awful lot of things that have left me feeling very optimistic. I mean, we do have this $80 billion proposal sitting out there. We have your vision map. We have a Congress that it seems in a bipartisan way to be interested in addressing long-standing backlogs in infrastructure investment. There's, all the stars are aligning, and that gives me reason for optimism. I'm also very anxious about some things that maybe might stop our progress. I look at what's happening in the Gulf Coast, for example, as the kind of thing that threatens what we're trying to get done here in the long term. So I'll ask you, just as I asked Bill and Stephen, what are you feeling the most optimistic about, and kind of what's keeping you up at night?
Well, I think, look, I think the optimism is largely around what you just alluded to, which is that there's it's unrealistic to think there's ever going to be complete unanimity of a viewpoint, but there is clearly a consensus right now around the idea of investing record amounts in infrastructure, and recognizing also that infrastructure in the 21st century, straddles physical infrastructure, technological infrastructure, and human capital infrastructure. And I think the president's plan reflects sort of a recognition that we all knew, that we've kicked the can down the road for so long on so many different things, that what we now have is a whole list of really important things that need to be done. And what we've done up until now is we've all said, okay, well, your project sounds like it makes a whole lot of sense, but you know what? My project is just as important. But since we were only committing levels of resources that created an ability to do 1 out of 10 worthwhile projects, we created this political dynamic where one person was advocating for a project and 9 were opposing it. And it created a stalemate where we just got nothing done. And the reality is, it isn't that Gateway is or isn't more important than the BMP tunnel or some other project. They're all important. And the fact that for 40 years we haven't done anywhere near what we should have been doing has just created this backlog of really critical projects. So my optimism is around the fact that there is an administration in place that recognizes that we have to stop making sort of false choices. Do you eat or do you have heat? We've got to do both, and we've got to find a way to be able to do that. And my concern, and what keeps me up at night, are folks who are reluctant to accept that, because they're sort of reluctant to accept the idea that we have failed to meet our commitments for decades, and so now we have to make up for that failure by being much more bold and much more aggressive than we otherwise would have been.
Well, Tony, that I feel like I almost could have written that. I share all of those. The one thing that I will add to that, though, is that one of the things that gives me optimism that we can fight back on that is the folks that are here on our Zoom session today. We're going to have a bunch of meetings tomorrow and the next day and the rest of the weekend. I'm pretty optimistic that we've got the right voices involved from all across the country to drag that across the finish line.
Yeah, it sounds like you do. And look, I have to tell you that Amtrak is an entity that we've done, I think, a lot to create a level of stability to. But we are basically an entity that is essentially 100% owned by the government and relies on the U.S. government in order to provide the level of support that lets us meet our mission. But our mission is to serve your members. And so the more that Congress hears from your members, the more that message becomes something that resonates with them, because this is basically, I joke with people and say, it's really not about the trains, it's about the people on the trains. Well, the reality is that, RPA is the people on the trains. And that's a message that people in the political world will hear in some ways, clearer than they would even from us.
I think that's true. And I think we've seen that, particularly in recent years. I think we've been able to bring some voices into the conversation that haven't been there before. And I think Congress has responded to that.
Yeah.
I'm feeling good about this week. And my goodness, I'm so grateful for, we finally got the opportunity to have you speak to our spring council meeting. Good luck with everything. And listen, thanks again for clearing some time for us. And, I hope to actually see you in person
Yes.
pretty soon. It's been a long time,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you've been very generous with your time, Tony, and
No.
and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you for having me, and hopefully we'll all see each other on a train soon. So
That would be ideal.
that.
That would be ideal.
Okay. Sounds great.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks again for having me. All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye now.